The world is a little freaky right now. It's, you know, one dictator's vowing to vaporize America with nukes. Another may have interfered in the elections. I mean, so it just is getting crazier by the second. But now to tell us how she'd have handled things, please welcome a fabulous woman in her own right, the former Secretary of State and author of the new book, Democracy, Condoleezza Rice. You know, we were talking about Sally Yates' testimony, and, you know, President Obama warned Trump about Michael Flynn. A whole lot of people warned about this man. How do you make somebody heed a warning that they may not want to hear?
Well, let me just say, I've been in Washington, and a lot of times people say, oh, I told him this, I told him that. I don't know what those conversations were really like, so I'm not going to go there.
Right.
I'm just going to tell you this. Michael Flynn is gone.
Yes.
And H.R. McMaster is as good as you can do for National Security Advisor. And so Americans ought to be comforted by the character of the person who's there. This is one of the most decorated and best generals of his generation.
Isn't he having trouble with Trump, though, right now?
Not that I can see.
Yeah.
I actually think this is a really good national security team. Look, we have a different kind of president, all right? He's different. He'd never...
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Very diplomatic.
He had never been in government before. And when you haven't been in government before, sometimes it looks kind of easy in there until you get in there.
Yeah.
And when he said, you know, this job's a lot harder than I thought, I actually kind of felt bad for him, because it is a really hard job, and it's a lonely job, and you want people around you who you trust. So they've done well. Rex Tillerson is a really good Secretary of State, and Jim Mattis is a great Secretary of Defense, and they've got some really tough problems, as you were just saying at the beginning. You know, when you're dealing with a North Korean leader who is, let's just say, reckless. He might even be unhinged.
Yeah.
And he is getting better with nuclear weapons. He's getting longer in his ranges to perhaps one day reach the United States. I don't care who you are as president. That's a scary proposition.
You take it seriously.
You take it seriously.
Well, Madam Secretary, it's been alleged that weeks before President Trump's inauguration, Flynn discussed American sanctions against Russia, as well as other areas, perhaps, of possible cooperation with the Russian ambassador. As someone who has had that position as National Security Advisor, would you have felt comfortable at that time, before the inauguration, having those conversations, or is that inappropriate?
Well, let me make a distinction here, because when you are the National Security Advisor-elect, in other words, your guy's been elected, but you've not yet been inaugurated, you will have conversations with foreigners. They want to meet you, they want to establish a relationship. The thing you shouldn't do is to talk about policy, suggest that you might be changing the policy of the administration, because there's only one president at a time. Until the new president is sworn in, the president who is there gets to make policy. So I don't know what Michael Flynn did or did not say. I'll just say that as a matter of principle, you can talk to anybody in that period, but you should never suggest that you might be making changes in policy and maybe they should just wait until there's a change in administration. I don't know whether he did or did not, but the principle is you wouldn't do that.
So you mentioned Rex Tillerson, and you're a big fan of his. I hear you now when I've read that. And he has the same job you had.
That's right.
Right. But the difference between him and you, I think, is that he has deep ties, business ties to Russia. And it seems as though we were talking this morning about all these people who are attached to Russia. I mean, what do you make of all that attachment to Russia?
Well, if you're an oil man, the Russians have what people call good geology, right? They've got a lot of oil. And if you're an oil CEO, of course, you're going to try to negotiate with Vladimir Putin to get rights to drill for that oil. That's what you're going to do. I think what you've seen, though, is that whatever Rex Tillerson's relationships may have been in Russia, he is acting on the basis of what the Russians are doing. He did something I'm not sure I would have had the nerve to do. He went to Moscow just before he's going to meet with Putin, and he says, well, the Russians were either incompetent or they were lying about the Syrian chemical weapons. I thought, wow, that's rough. I'm not sure I would have said that. So he's acting on our behalf.
I get that about him, but what about the rest of them? The rest of them didn't work for Exxon.
Well, just look at where relations are with the Russians. Again, I think we ought to be looking into what ties were there. That makes perfectly good sense. But I also want to say something about Vladimir Putin and interfering in our elections. He has been trying to interfere in our elections and everybody else's for a very long time. What cyber allows him to do is to do it more efficiently and more quickly. But let's not deceive ourselves that the Russians haven't tried these tricks before. They have. Now, I would have said, I would have said to the Russians, we know you did it. Right? At a time of our choosing, we will find a way to punish that behavior. But Vladimir Putin is an eye for an eye kind of person. And we questioned, or Secretary Clinton questioned the legitimacy of his election in 2012. Now he's saying, now I'm going to question the legitimacy of your election by hacking into it and so forth. So don't let him get the satisfaction of thinking that we don't believe our own elections to be legitimate.
So do you think that was a personal eye for an eye against Hillary Clinton?
I do think it. I think it was personal. But he likes to intimidate. Now, I can tell you that I was with him on many occasions. And one particular occasion, we went into a room to discuss, and his people are sitting on one sofa, he and his foreign minister, I'm sitting on the other. And I'm delivering a message about U.S.-Russian relations, and they were messing around in Georgia at the time. And I said, you know, Mr. President, if you do anything in Georgia, President Bush wants you to know that that would greatly affect our relationship. And he stood up. And now he's peering over me. And so, just on instinct, I stood up too. Now, I'm 5 foot.
He didn't realize. So he was peering over.
I'm 5'10" in heels. He's not.
He's short.
And so, what you can't do is be intimidated by Putin or let him play these psychological games.
But Madam Secretary, if he indeed did engage in these types of tactics in our election, then the very legitimacy of our election is at issue, isn't it?
No, no. And that's where I would, first of all, I don't want to question his motives beyond he's an eye for an eye kind of person. Secondly, I trust the people who voted in Wisconsin and Texas and Alabama and California to have voted on the basis of who they thought was best going to represent their interest. And so I'm not going to question the legitimacy of their vote because Vladimir Putin tried to interfere in the elections. That's just a step that I don't think we should take. Let's trust our fellow citizens to have been smart enough to vote for the people that they thought they ought to be voting for.
You referenced North Korea before, which is something that I think many people are very concerned that we're potentially headed to war. How do you feel about President Trump's approach to Kim Jong-un, saying he would be willing to sit down with him without preconditions? This is something that's been controversial that President Obama did with other countries. Does that concern you? I mean, complimenting him in some ways, does that demean our ability or diminish our ability to combat a tyrant potentially?
Well, it's not the language I would have used. Look, Kim Jong-un is smart. He wouldn't still be there if he weren't smart. And you don't get anywhere by underestimating the brain power of your adversary. So let's not assume that he's not smart. He is. But he's also extremely dangerous, reckless, and, as I said, maybe a little unhinged. So I think what they're trying to do is the only country in the world that maybe has some influence with the North Koreans, the Chinese. And so they're saying to the Chinese, all right, we know that you haven't so far been willing to put the screws to North Korea because you're worried that regime might collapse and then you'll have refugees and a long, unstable border. But let's tell you something. The worst outcome is you don't do anything about the North Koreans and then we have to. And no president can sit there and let the North Koreans get long-range missiles able to reach the United States. So
do you find it interesting that the relationship between China and the new guy?
Just won't say his name.
No, I won't. Needs to be a little clearer for the American people because there's been a lot of conversations about, you know, getting your, what was it, his, oh my God, see, I had, the brain is gone. When he was getting his, he was able to get, his patent,
Oh, the
his patent
trademarks.
trademarks
Yeah,
and
the
stuff.
trademarks.
And all of these things that came tumbling into the new guy's lap once he became president, shouldn't he kind of clear up that he's representing, as our president, he's not representing his corporation, but representing us and our needs?
Oh, absolutely. It should be absolutely clear, and he should do everything that he can to make that absolutely clear. This is new. We've never had somebody who's never been in government. We've never had somebody who came directly out of the business community into the government. And so we're making new waves here, new policy and new directions.
He made me love George Bush, I'll tell you that.
Joy, I've been here with you a couple times. I never thought I'd hear you say that.
I never thought I'd say it.
So wait a minute. Yeah, hell just froze over. Our thanks to Condoleezza Rice. Her book is called Democracy. And members of our audience, you're all going home with a copy.